Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Andrew Missick, and I want to talk about my new book. It's called The Further Acts of the Apostles, according to Abdias of Babylon, disciple of Jesus Christ. And this is a reconstruction I did of a ancient book uh, called Abdias of Babylon. And it's the lives of the 12 apostles in 10 chapters. And, a lot of people are kind of curious. Jesus chose these 12 men. We have interesting stories in the Gospels and some exciting stories in the book of Acts. And then the book of Acts ends, and it's like, well, what happened with these other apostles? What did Philip and Andrew and Thomas? What did they do later? So we hear we've got these stories about Peter and Paul, but not a lot about the other apostles. But a lot of things were written down in apocryphal texts and by the early church fathers. And I think some of these stories, of course, you have folklore and legend mixed in, but I think some of these stories are, based on historical events. And, a lot of, you see these graphics, these memes, like how did the 12 apostles die? And one of the things I was doing when I was putting this book together, and, I guess it is relevant to know how they died, but how these apostles live? What did they do and say and teach? And so I'm trying to make ancient literature accessible to a greater Christian reading public and people who are interested in these stories. And this morning I was teaching in my church, and I was talking about there's this book. I think that this was it Litkin, the author's name. The book is called After Acts. So this Bible scholar, theologian, he did a lot of research in the lives of the 12 apostles, and he wrote up a short narrative, and then he grades the stories if he thinks they're true or not with A, B, C, D, or F. So a lot of the stories have A's and B's. Some of them have C's. Some of them he just straight up gives a D and an F if he thinks they're too fantastical or sensational or not historical or don't have any grounding in facts. So it's very interesting. But then I was thinking with Abdias of Babylon, why don't we just present these stories as they were told to the general Christian reading public and let them enjoy them, be edified by them, and make their own decision about them. And in my book, The Further Acts of the Apostles According to Abdias of Babylon, I do have a section in the back where I have commentary, and I express my own opinions about these stories as well. And I bring in research, and there's a lot of history, factual history, not fanciful legends or folklore or oral traditions. So we do have that as well. But history, stories about people like the emperors and how they interacted with the apostles, such as Nero and Caligula, and the stories play into the book of Acts. In the Bible, we have references to Claudius, to Tiberius, Claudius, Caligula, and Nero. And of course, Nero had Peter and Paul put to death, and this isn't considered folklore or just tradition. It's historical. And one of the interesting things, you're looking at these apocryphal texts, and some of these, we have some texts or versions and translations of these books produced by scholars, and often the scholars will say that some of these stories, like what we see in the Acts of Paul, where in the mid second century someone went and collected the oral tradition and recorded it and produced these books: the Acts of Peter, the Acts of Paul, the Acts of Andrew, the Acts of John. And they preserve these ancient stories, which I think are relevant and interesting and educational.